New season, new year, new me.
That's is that the motto for this
That's how it
season?
works.
Okay.
That's how it works.
All right.
January 1st, episode 1, fresh
Yep.
start, clean slate.
Yeah.
Roll the credits. From Sydney, Australia, all the way to Portland, USA, two misfits hang out after class to riff on the B-sides of professional life. These are your professional misfits. All the way from Sydney, Australia, I am your host, Christopher Sellers.
I'm from Portland, Oregon. I'm Broedy Ipox.
And we're your professional misfits where we riff on the B-sides of professional life. We're bass? We're fish. We're back, misfits. We're back. Season 4, episode 1. Broedy, you look amazing over your break. If you lost weight, you had a kid. Broedy had a kid in the 3-week break. Look amazing. Kid number 5. How is it?
I look amazing. I look like I just came off the street. I got a giant mustache for the misfits that are listening on Spotify, and I'm in a ripped up workout shirt. So I'm looking good.
Only the best impressions for episode 1 of the new season. That's how we roll.
I have to be controversial. You know? Do you show up in a button-up shirt, or do you show up in the outfit that you're going to wear to work out? And I don't know.
It's authentic, right? It's authentic. It's the real me.
Yes. Yeah, new baby. And that is the reason for said look. But it's good. Things are good.
All right. If you want to hear more about Brody's 5 kids, you can join Camp Misfit and listen to the March bonus episode. It's there. We break it all down. We don't care about his kids in this episode. In this episode, Misfits, it's Misfit life skills. So what are the skills we think you need, that everybody needs in order to get by, to survive? I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. And tell us what you think, because arguably, you know, if someone might say that driving is a life skill because, you know, but some people live in the city, for instance, where driving isn't such a life skill. So let's break it down. Let's get into it. Broedy, as per the standard, I'm pushing you straight under the bus. Do you have a top 3 or 4 or 5 life skills that you noted down that you think everyone should have, that you want your kids to have, that you have, that other people don't have, those sorts of things?
Yeah.
Shoot.
So it's 3.
Okay.
And I'd say communication is number 1.
Okay.
Being able to communicate, I think, solves a lot of deficiencies that you might have in other areas.
Okay. Give us the next 2 and we'll deep dive. Yep.
This is going to sound so ridiculous, but it actually came from your description of the episode. One of the things that I think is fundamentally important, and I just boiled it down to that fun little phrase, but knowing how to cook. And not so much just the simplest, phrase of it, but really understanding how to keep yourself alive, I guess is what that looks like. And then number 3 is managing the internal dialogue. So outside of communication, I think there's a little bit of, I guess, communicating that we do with ourselves, but I put it in a different bubble because it takes a different skill set. And I think if you don't have that, you're farther behind than somebody that does. So those are my 3. My 3.
That's interesting. Okay, so I nerded out on this a little bit. I took myself for coffee about an hour before we're going to sit down. And I thought, what are some life skills? And then I come up with a page full. And then I actually came up with like 3 specific different categories of life skills, which I'll get to in a second. But what I want to cover first is the Google search I did for let's say top 10.
I did one too. But it was a specific Google search, so let's hear yours.
No, because I sort of knew this would be the case because it's the LinkedIn answer of what are life skills? What does everybody need? And here we go. You've got skills like critical thinking, decision making, empathy, conflict resolution, stress management, time management. This shit
It came from an HR pamphlet.
bro, it was cringy as fuck. But of course, okay, look, but you read all of those and go, okay, time management is a life skill. How do I employ that? Like, give me practical steps, right? Stress management, that's a life skill. Okay, how do I do that, Google? Now I did pick out 3 that were already on my original list, and I think you might have mentioned them as well. So like cooking's on there. Yeah, like how do you prepare a meal so you don't starve and die? That is an essential skill.
It is.
We'll get into that.
So too, yeah.
One that was mentioned is like financial literacy. And on the Google search that they had 3 or 4 different definitions, but basic money in, money out. Do you know how to pay bills? Do you know what taxes are? These sorts of things. And funnily enough, creativity was on Google's top 10 and wasn't on mine. So, but to break it down, so
why wasn't it on yours?
I guess because oh wow, I've outed myself. Or maybe it was just like wood for the trees sort of thing, because I guess I was trying to keep it practical rather than like an idealist philosophy of what one needs as a life skill. I wanted to like really break it down to sort of brass tacks.
Which is fair, because that's exactly what we're talking about that feels like bullshit, right? And that's what I tried to stay away from was the philosophical kind of intellectual, those kind of, and it's like again, if we're talking about rules for life, which is brutal and chaotic and violent and hectic, I'm not always going to think my way out of it,
right? Yes. Right. So this sort of leads me to my little amateur breakdown of what I thought. So I broke it into let's assume that literacy and numeracy is taken care of. So everyone's fluent in their native language. Done. I broke it down to domestic, personal, and social.
Okay.
So some domestic essential skills, like we've covered cooking. Yes, I agree. I'm asking, do you think cleaning or like laundry is one? I know it's a shitty chore, but one benefits from knowing how to do it. For instance, yes, you can outsource, whatever. So those were the ones I had for domestic. For personal, there's a few little ones like personal hygiene. Do you know how to take care of yourself? You mentioned like how do you manage your health, your own personal health, like inner and outer? That's something that only you are going to be responsible for. One I've got underlined here that we're going to talk about that wasn't on any list anywhere was sex. Like your sexual appetite, your sexual needs and likes and wants, and your sexual personality. I'll touch on an anecdote about that later, about someone that had a skills gap in that area, and it was really quite telling. But like as a life skill, would you not think that one should be sexually self-aware? Food for thought, Misfits. And then in the social category, I've got like how to win, like learning how to win, how to lose, how to cope with failure, how to form friendships and relationships and even partnerships with people. Like those social skills are really, really important. Like we're social creatures. And one I got here, which I guess is sort of for me, because I really value it, it's like how to be a traveler. And the difference between being a traveler and a tourist. You know what I mean? It's like once you're out of your comfort zone, how do you behave? How do you interact? How do you mix with the locals? And how do you adapt and survive, I guess?
Yeah. Is it confidence or is it confusion that drives you?
Sometimes both,
Right,
you're lost in the middle of a foreign city. You're going to have to learn to find your way out. And I'll speak on another anecdote about that, of a girl that I traveled with who just couldn't read Google Maps and had a complete breakdown. So what do you think, Misfits? This is sort of our overview. I know I'm cheating because I told Broedy, give me the top 3, and then I've given him 3 categories with about 15 different skills. But food for
Well,
thought.
look, the reason that I picked those 3 was because they fucking neatly touched on like 5 or 6 other, right? Like it wasn't just the singular phrase that was the rule there. I mean, those apply to quite a bit.
All right, let's start with the simplest one. Like, why should everyone know how to cook?
I
Can
mean,
you cook?
Yeah, and I love cooking. I love cooking.
Nice.
Yeah, I seriously, basic skill for so many different reasons. I think when I put that rule down too, I think it was 2-piece for me.
Mhm.
I think so. Number one, being able to cook, right? You know, being able to provide a meal for yourself, sustain yourself,
Mhm.
find a meal if you need to. How would you do that? Those kind of things, right? And then number two, what am I eating? You know, like what does that do for
Right.
me? Like, you know, do I have a general knowledge of the nutritional value of the things that are going into my body, or the things that I even need for my body to do the things that it should? If
Mhm.
you don't know those things, or if this kind of like conversation kind of triggers that where you're like, oh, I haven't even thought about it, you might consider it, you know, like, because you are a human being and this is a biological machine. And
Mhm.
if you don't know how it operates and you don't know how to fuel it, I mean, good luck. I mean, good luck. Good luck. Good luck. And I think people would argue with me because they go, "Oh yeah, well, there's so many homeless people out there that don't know how to feed themselves, or there's so many people that you know, have been fed by the system or by their
Wow.
parents or by
Okay.
others, like things like that." It's like, yeah, I agree. When those institutions or those support pillars fail or are no longer existent, what then does that person have?
Yeah, it's for some reason this is what the thought that triggered for me was it's interesting when if we're talking about business or the way tax works with your money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And normally there's a slew of people in the comments going, "No one taught us this in school. These are life skills. The banking system and all this sort of shit." And like, yeah, I agree, but you know, the information is available if you want to go look for it. You can't be spoon fed everything. But cooking is one of these skills that is in every home and isn't taught in school. And then but it's still an interesting the percentages of uptake. You know, so some and then also with men, for instance, because there's been a stereotype for a long, long time that, you know, well, women do all the cooking and men don't cook and all this sort of shit. Where I can, with some confidence, say that's probably been erased by now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that sort of I've experienced the inverse with at least a half dozen girls that I've dated. Like they would burn cereal. It just not a
Interesting.
just not a skill, or like frozen pizza will do, and this sort of thing.
So do you think that's kind of what I was talking about though, where it's like people, and it's funny that you made that reference to it being in a home but not being taught, right? Like, and that's kind of the thing. Like, I don't actually inherently remember my mother or father sitting down with
that was going
me.
to be my question. Like, were you included in the kitchen, for instance? Because I know my mum, even if it was simple, right? Brody's got a thoughtful look on his
I
face.
don't think so. I don't think so.
Because my mum, I guess she sort of made it fun whenever she was baking sweet things. So if we started with like chocolate chip cookies or even like cake mix out of the packet. You know what I mean? Well, can I mix the eggs? Can I mix the milk? And can I lick the bowl afterwards? And so you sort of include it in that way, and then you want to cook other things. You know, Brody's just no
No,
interesting.
no.
All right,
Yeah.
so okay, if that's
I
the
mean,
case,
maybe licking the spoon. Like, I have memories of that, but I don't even have memories of like, and maybe this is like a me thing where I didn't like ask to, you know,
well,
put
then
the eggs
when
in
did
the
it
bowl.
kick in for you? Then when did you realize? When did you sort of say, yeah, I need to, I want to, this is fun, this is a life skill?
I don't know. I moved out at 18, and it was kind of just like I instinctually started doing it. You know, it
Right.
wasn't like a question of you know, it's like that's why I included it in there. It's like
Mm.
it because it's such an instinctual piece of survival, like like actual survival that I don't.
Keep going, keep going, keep going.
I don't think that I don't think that people necessarily. God, it sounds like such an idiot thing to say. That people don't need to be taught per se. That it can just be naturally, pieces of it obtained. And like that's my thing. Is like I turned 18 or whatever, and like whether it was through due process or watching somebody do this, or maybe somebody did explain to me one
Mm.
thing and it made sense for a bunch of things, because that's kind of how cooking works, right? Like
Often, yeah. You know,
so.
if you know how to, if you can figure out how to boil pasta, then you can probably figure out how to boil rice. You can probably figure out how to boil an egg. It's,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I think I just kind of knew that like that's the next step, is that mom's not preparing meals. Like
Yeah.
who's gonna do it? Me. Like so I would just go to the grocery store and pick up things that were familiar. And I think it started getting a little more in. I started getting a little bit more involved in the knowledge that I had around it and the
Mm,
practice that I put into it probably in my 20s. And that's even evolved more so in the last couple years, with paying attention to what goes into the kids' food
of
and
course,
what
yeah,
they're
yeah, yeah.
eating, and really paying attention how that's affecting their mood and their bodies and
Yep.
their performance. So I don't know. It was just something that for me, I just started swinging,
Mm,
just like, and I'm glad I did, because again, I know people now that would rather eat out 7 days a week
yeah,
than go to the store once a week and
yeah,
prepare
yeah, yeah,
meals
yeah.
for themselves. Which is just for me. And don't get me wrong, Misfits. I've had weeks where I'm eating out every day, like, but to not be able to because I'm just not taking the initiative would just
Yeah.
be a different story.
Having the choice is one thing
Right,
compared to,
right.
yeah.
So for you,
Um,
what was it like? Because you went to uni, right?
well, yeah, but I guess like in the house, it was, we were sort of brought up around it and we were included in it. And so, but I think, yeah, I went to college. I could, yeah, college in Sydney.
How was meals in college? Because I didn't go to
Cheap,
college, and it's same
cheap,
for me. Early 20s, cheap. It's like hot dogs and
cheap,
fucking
baby.
rice and shit.
And the one of the perks of working hospo is they'll feed you, you know. And I guess, and that's the sort of flip side to this conversation as well, is like working in hospitality, you get an appreciation of how food is prepped, cooked,
Mm.
cut, prepared, delivered. And I was lucky enough to work at some decent sort of places, but just having that, I guess you'll take out of you'll get out of it what you sort of put into it. You know what I mean? So if you just want to put your head
Hmm.
down and do your 8 hours and walk out and go and get pissed at the pub, then okay. But I guess like, oh well, how did you do that, and how do we can put this together? And like you realize that if you can build this here in the restaurant, then I can build this here at home, or I can build like the diet version at home.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and that was cool. So just having it sort of spoils you a little bit as well, because then you get used to, well, I know what good meat is, and I'm never ordering risotto at a restaurant ever, because I know it costs you 2 cents to make, and you'll charge $18 like restaurant price. No chance. So so little things like that. So I guess, but from what you were saying as well, an
Hmm.
appreciation of the food that you have, and often that will go hand in hand with an appreciation of yourself. And I care about what I want to eat and what I want to consume and where it comes from. I still do it now. If I buy a roast chicken from the supermarket, I'll still come home, break it down, and then put it into the oven to make sure it's roasted, because I don't trust like one bad chicken and you know about it for a week. Um,
Yeah,
so
potentially longer.
but yeah, right. So let us know, Misfits. Like, is cooking on your hit list? Is cooking on your hit list? Is it a must-have? Is it a nice-to-have? You know, or do you not need it at all because you got a wife or a mother that can do everything for you? All right. Next on what was next? What's number two on yours?
Number one was communication. Number two was cooking.
All right. Well, so communication, specify. It was very broad, Brody.
It is very broad for good reason. So I think it is multifaceted. I think communication covers so many things that we as human beings are designed to do, right? And I I I think if you don't know how to do that, whether it's a simple conversation or complex negotiating,
Conflict
or
resolution is on the list from Google.
there you go, even conflict resolution. I think it's not even just a disadvantage. You're just at a loss. You're just at a loss because I've actively seen it. And I mean, I've had instances myself where someone can out communicate me.
Mm.
And just talking in those simplest terms, where it's like if I had to prove a point or I had to use my voice to stand for something that I needed,
Mhm.
um, the guy that knows how to do it better is going to get what he needs, and that puts me at the back of the bus. And that's not, to me, it's just it's not something that I can negotiate on having that skill or not. And what's funny too, when I was initially thinking about it, the two things that stuck out the most to me were effective communication of emotions. So
Mhm.
like that being something that I think has been a strong advantage for me
Mm.
in this later part of my life. And then listening. And I think the reason being is because not just the benefit I think it has to the individual you're listening to, and how they receive that and how that relationship will be a benefit because of that. I genuinely think that's when we're most receptive to learn about ourselves as well. I think we're so often like caught up in that somebody else could never understand, right? Somebody could never do this or this. But we talked about it last season, and you said it really well. And you were making a joke, but it was like, think of all the songs that felt like they were written for you,
Mm.
and the movies that you watch and feel like it's your life. I think if you didn't know how to listen,
Yeah.
you wouldn't hear or see those things ever. And to me, that would make it dramatically hard to learn. If I never related to anything that I was consuming, it would just all feel for naught, and yeah. So that was the two big pieces for me. Was
Mm.
there needs to be, with communication, a emotional connection there, right? So it's not just words. I can't just be good with words. I have to be able to connect intent
Mhm.
or emotion to them. And then the second piece was listening. I think you're dead in the water if you can just do this,
Mm.
but you can't receive anything in return. It doesn't, at some point you won't have any more to communicate. You know what I mean? It will
Yeah.
just be you effectively communicated what you know, and because you only do this, you can't communicate anything else. You're not understanding or learning anything else. So that's it for me. Is communication on your list? Because
It,
you had the three categories.
yeah, I mean, I guess it's implied in the social skills and how to form friendships and relationships and how to be a good friend. I think you make a really good point on listening. I think that's overlooked, and I'll highlight the fact that being a good listener means knowing you don't always have to speak. Just being present. I'll share a personal anecdote from today. It's Teresa's birthday today, so she's a recurring character on this show. She got married in January. It's her 30th birthday. So I did a little bit of a vintage shop yesterday and got her a few kitsch items, and then went around to her work and caught her on her lunch break, which was amazing. So ducked out the back and gave her presents and having a nice time, and it was all really, really lovely. And then she gets a phone call from an unknown number, and she thought about answering it, and then she did, and it turned out to be the doctor that she saw maybe a week ago, because she had some sort of issues with her ovaries and her system and stuff like that. She just wanted a bit of a clarification. And whatever the news that she got was a shock to her. So I'm sitting next to her on the curb actually, in the laneway out the back. And we've gone from happy birthday Therese to on the phone. And like a film, you're watching her gradually crumble and go, okay, okay, then get very small, then start fidgeting with her shoelace, and then the tears sort of start to well up. You know what I mean? And in that moment, nothing I can do except sort of put my arm around her and just sit and wait for her to finish the call. And then we had a little bit of a debrief, and she admitted, like, she's like, "Oh, I'm just in shock. It's nothing severe, but it is something," and just sort of sit and talk through that. But to your point, for listening, if I sat next to her and go, "Hey, are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? Everything's all right. You'll be fine." You know, like, it's just neither the time nor the place. You know, also she has a husband to like take care of this, you know, primary caregiver role. I just happened to be there when she got the phone call. You know what I mean? So I want to be a good friend, but being a good friend is about supporting what she needs, not trying to show that I'm a good friend. So that was today, and that just sort of came to mind. But yeah, communication, look, again, wasn't specifically on my list, but social skills are, and I guess that's implied. You spoke more specifically to like being able to communicate yourself and your wants and your needs and hear it from other people. For me, social skills are as much about, you know, dealing with the cashier at the supermarket, you know, having some grace there, like being able to deal with the mechanic when you drop your car off, you know, these sorts of things, dealing with the neighbors in the cafe,
right?
You know, that sort of stuff. So it's not always, you're not always going to have hugely meaningful conversations with people, but at the same time, can you negotiate yourself with grace in a social setting? You know what I mean? If you were here for last season, you would have heard about Teresa's wedding and how it was hell for me. But still, as an introvert, it was absolute hell, and she was the only person I know. But I had to manage it with some sort of social grace. Yeah. So, but yes, you have a salient point of the clearer you can articulate yourself, your wants and needs. This doesn't always have to be verbally, folks. This can be written. If you're a fan of, you know, the love languages or whatever, find your love language, learn how to articulate yourself through that. Mind you, tell your partner, this is my love language and this is how I operate. Otherwise,
still speak on it.
Yeah.
It just works sometimes.
You know, there's a reason I want to touch you all the time. You know, that's for instance. But I think that's, yeah, most definitely, because I'm sure by contrast, we've all been in a room or in a relationship or had to work with someone who was terrible at communicating like what they need, what they want, when they want it, why they want it.
Shit, you know? I mean, I've even been that person, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
and
we all have.
And that shit sucks. Like, I will not lie to you. There's been multiple times in my life that I can think back on and like actually like viscerally still feel that feeling of not being understood and not really having the tools or what I needed to communicate what I was trying to express, you know, and that shit sucks. I'm just plain and simple. And yeah, like I said, I think a lot of the regulation on the emotional side of things is a lot easier when you do have a strong skill set in communication. It just, nothing's as bad as it could be. You know what I mean?
Specifically going to talk about that later, Misfits. We've got 1 or 2 episodes slated for this season where we're like, what is emotional intelligence? How does it matter? What does it matter? What does it do? So we'll get to deep dive with that. And probably with my friend Casey, who's got a PhD on all this sort of stuff, which would be really cool. Anyway.
It would be cool. Yeah,
it would be cool. And she's a cool chick. What's your number 3 for life skill?
Managing the internal dialogue.
All right. Explain.
Yeah. So, I mean, same vein is communication in terms of like its importance and where it like practically sits, but I think that, again, I said that because it's broad. I think one of the biggest disadvantages I've seen my kids have is not being able to emotionally control themselves in situations that it would have served them to done that.
Isn't
Like
that the nature of being a child?
it is,
I don't. Yeah, yeah,
it is, but and it's funny too because yes, and so much so that you want them to be in as many of those situations as possible. So the
yeah.
next time that situation arises,
They
they
can correct
they
behavior.
can right they can course correct. That so like that's been the thing for me, and I'll tell you this: early 20s. And I've said this on a couple episodes. My internal dialogue was absolute shit. I was mean to myself. It was a scary place to be in my
Mm.
head with me, and I that put me in a lot of really bad social situations
Mhm.
because of what I thought I deserved and because
Mhm.
of where I was telling myself I should be. It put me in a terrible place just in general mental wellness. It's funny. People think that you can still have a good life and be hard on yourself, and it's like I don't agree with that. Like I really fully believe that one of the first things that happened for me to see a positive shift in my life was that internal dialogue changing. And
It's really interesting you mentioned that, but keep going. Yeah.
well, and the reason I say that is because, again, I think it's lost on a lot of people. I think you get to 25, 30, 40, and you're kind of set in that pattern, right?
Yeah.
Like you have that relationship with your head. So you'll go to work and slam your coat in the door and be like, God, you fucking idiot. Like that shit's bad, like it's bad, and
Yeah.
people just don't get it. Like the thing is, your subconscious even doesn't have any fucking idea what you're saying is truth or not. It can't not discern. So you sitting there telling yourself you're a fucking idiot all day, when you go to bed at night, that's the program that's fucking playing. That's the
Mm.
script that's fucking being read over and
Which,
over again.
which means anytime you make a future mistake, it's like, oh, it's because I'm an idiot. Yeah.
And that sucks. Like that,
Yeah.
you're not. You're really not. You
And
made a
and it's a
fucking
it's a tough
mistake.
loop to break. It's a
It
really it
oh,
is a tough loop to break. Like let's
because it's too
okay.
easy of a habit to make.
All right. So make this practical for the misfits at home. Like yeah, okay.
Okay.
If I'm understanding you, what you're describing is self awareness, and then
Yes.
from that
Yes.
from a clear sense of self awareness, then how to regulate that behavior.
Yep.
Why is that a life skill? Why is it important?
Hmm. Yeah. So the reason that I point that out, and thinking about it when we were talking about the episode, I immediately flashed to my kids, and the moments in time when they're having an emotional outburst, and then they're embarrassed about it afterwards, or these small instances, and then I think about that for myself. And then I think about, okay, well, what would have happened on a more dramatic scale if I had carried those behaviors into adulthood?
Mm.
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, I don't know, because I was blessed enough to have those skills and have someone tell me that self regulation was important and that self awareness is key, and all those things. And again, that's for me. It's like, I guess I could just let these guys go do their thing and not push that self awareness piece as hard as it was pushed on me as a
mhm,
kid. But that scares me because, again, I've seen them in moments that they didn't have it. I've been in situations where I didn't necessarily have it.
mhm,
And those always ended poorly. Those were always bad situations when I couldn't stop and say, hey, is this the best move? And if it's not, what's the next best move?
mm.
Always that guy that didn't have that conversation, he's in trouble. He's in trouble. He's in trouble in some way or another. He just hurt somebody. He just hurt himself. He just got into a shitty situation. He just did some dumb shit. So for me, it's part of survival, right? And what's even more so is I like the way that I was thinking about my rules. It wasn't. I'm not just trying to touch on survival. I would really like that my basic rules cover survival and in body being better, right? Like
Hmm. Hmm.
so each thing in the communication, the emotional regulation, the self-awareness, those the learning to cook, the overarching kind of narrative here is that it's going to ultimately set you up for the best life, right? Like if you know how to cook, if you know how to communicate, if you know how to self-regulate, you're more often than not going to be in a situation better than somebody that doesn't. So,
Hmm.
I mean, that's it for me. I don't know if that answered the question, but like, I really feel like in terms of it being, why is it a rule for me is it has helped my survival more than it's ever hurt, you know?
Hmm.
And I'm glad that I now have conversations with myself as opposed to thinking about when I was in my teens or early 20s and doing things that I didn't even have a second thought about. I was just doing that mindset again. It just freaks me out looking back now. I'm not like that. So, yeah, that's it for me.
Hmm. Hmm.
Why, well, let me ask this. Why do you
Yeah.
think, what do you think it's not a rule? Does it not kind of fall in the parameters of those categories? Because I mean, I feel like somewhere along the lines it would fit.
Yeah. I'm sure. I'm sure there's a parallel there somewhere. I think I stayed away from that. I stayed away from the internal sphere of things. I know we're probably going to get into that later in the series. But also, I wanted to try and keep it practical for
Mm-hmm,
me.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't disagree. It's just not on this list today. You
Yep,
know what I mean?
I do. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
what else? I mean, what else have I got here? Like personal, yeah, like or manage your health and all that sort of stuff.
So, do you want to hear what my Google search was?
Yeah, go on. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
My Google search was, what are 10 rules for life and survival?
Okay, right.
And I went down a rabbit hole. There's like 15 different articles. And then I came across the 12 Rules for Life by Jordan
I
Peterson.
was
And
gonna say, did you stumble into Peterson? You would have had to have stumbled
I
into
did.
Peterson.
And
All
it
right.
was interesting because I haven't read that book. I
Yep.
like Peterson. I've seen a lot of his speeches and those kind of things, his public events and stuff like that. I haven't read his books. So it was interesting to see these. Have you heard of them? Have you heard of the rules?
I've heard of the book. I'm not familiar with the rules.
It was
12 Rules for Life or something.
Yeah, this will be a clip. Stand up straight with your shoulders back.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. Treat yourself like someone you're responsible for helping.
That's okay.
Make friends with people who want the best for you. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
Mm-hmm.
This one cracks me up. And I don't know if I agree or disagree with it. It's
Right,
the
right.
most frustrating thing. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them.
Hmm.
Yeah, ugh, I'm on the fence about it. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. And that was one too that I thought was very interesting. And that's
Mm-hmm.
also more practical than it is just some hoity-toity shit, you know.
Yeah.
Make your bed, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
fuck, that's some simple advice that I think a lot of people would have a better life if they did. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. I thought that too was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the truth, or at least don't lie.
Okay.
Assume the person you are listening to might know something you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Be precise in your speech. Don't bother children when they are playing. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street.
Okay.
And those are our 12 rules. Those are the 12 rules for life. And this is a bestseller on Amazon. Just so people know, Jordan B. Peterson, PhD in, I think it's psychology and then family psychology as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
pretty learned guy, but these were interesting to me.
And again, it's interesting that sex isn't on that list.
No, not even a little bit. No. And it wasn't, I'm going to be honest with you too. It wasn't, not once out of the 3-4 times that I've actively sat down and thought about our recording session, did it come across mine either. And it's funny too, because I'm a man in my 30s with 5 children. So like it probably should have, like I probably should have.
We should have some awareness.
Had some rules or some guidelines.
So, all right, let's get into it. This is why it's most definitely on my list. And it was one of the first that I pulled up. It's obviously our Darwinian impulse to recreate. That's the end goal here for the future of humanity. There's that. All right. But it's personally, emotionally, in relationships, we can't ignore that it's a driving force. And I mean it in the purest sense of the word, not necessarily lust, but our sexual drive is present in all of us. And if you're the sort of misfit at home who goes, oh, is it really? I'm going to say yes. Yeah. And the reason...
Because you're attaching it to intimacy, correct?
That too. But, and this is where I start to unpack things. The reason why you doubt it is because, it doesn't make Google's list. It doesn't make Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's list. And generally in Western society, there's a lot of silence and a lot of shame around one's sexual exploration. We'll get into the social ramifications later. But by developing, unless you develop your own personal sexual sense of self, who am I? And this goes for the queer folk as well, which is why I sort of love it so much. Like, who am I attracted to and why? And sexually, what does that mean for me? And how do I want that to play out? And if I have a consenting partner, how's that going to play out with us? Because you realize early on that sex isn't a one-man show. You need one or more partners there. And so then this communication, that becomes really imperative and intimate and personal, and is going to make up a large part of your identity. I say that with all seriousness, because we can observe everywhere what happens to people when they repress, shut down, dismiss, avoid their sexuality, and in the modern age where they step into it in a way that's hyper sexual, which isn't connected to anything either, which is just as toxic and destructive to individuals as well as other people. So there's two extremes. There's two extremes of like absolute pure pornography to everyone, like we should never talk about it in public, ever. And the extension of that is you barely talk about it with your partner. And I'll back that. I'll lay any money and any odds on that, right? So then how do you develop this healthy sexual sense of sexual identity? And fun fact, there's only one way to do it, and that's by exploring it with people. There's so much you can do online, and I mean that legitimately, not just looking at porn, but right? To explore that and what it means for you. Now, look, I'll backtrack. Like, I was very, very lucky that the first girl that I slept with ended up being a long-term girlfriend. And she had a very positive sexual attitude and appetite. She was a little bit older than me. So my first experiences of being with a girl. You know, guys are never virgins, right? So pretty sure I lied about it at the time. And it wasn't until probably 6 or 9 months into the relationship I mentioned, "Oh yeah, by the way, you're the first," and she's like, "No." Anyway, um, so I had a healthy, positive, encouraging first encounter, you know, and then over time in a healthy relationship. So I was very lucky in that sense. Not everyone has that same experience, right? And sex in particular is one of those formative things that the way it sort of happens the first 1 or 2 times, you sort of get the impression that's the way it's always going to be, you know. Which isn't true either. Like your sexual appetites, your wants and needs, your desires, what you can find from other people are going to shift and change over time, and it's beholden to you to understand what that is for you, why that is for you, how to communicate that, how to get what you want, and also how to screen out and reject that what you don't want. There's my rant on sex. Broedy, what's take a breath.
Well, I was going to try to argue with you, and the reason being that in terms of individual survival, right?
Mhm.
Life, living.
Mhm.
To me, it just didn't register as important, right? And it's funny. I think listening to you go through that, more of it being, God damn, it's so weird, bro. I didn't realize it felt so shameful to talk about things like that for me.
Yeah, right.
That it is. It's a man, and it's weird because I don't think I've ever had a healthy, normal conversation about sexual relationships with any of my male role models. Any of them.
For real.
Not. I'm so dead serious. None. And that's bizarre, because then I was like sitting here and I was like, again, okay, how do I get back into argument mode? You know, like this should throw me off as hard as it does. But then I was like, why the fuck isn't this why isn't this part of a discussion in class, right? Like in school, like we're learning home ec. Like again, that's the meal, right? Teach me how to cook a meal.
Mm-hmm.
Then here to me, this kind of relates to the managing the internal dialogue, the self-awareness, right? And where's the classes for that? You know, where's the classes for being able to, in a healthy way, have that conversation, not only with yourself, but again, like you said, with a partner. I cannot fucking imagine, dude, at 16 years old, being able to look at anybody that I was rolling in the hay with and be like, hey, how is this for you? Is this okay? Like I actually wish now, as a fucking grown, empathetic fucking man to this circumstance, I wish, but that wasn't taught to me.
Sure, but we're all like that at 16, honestly. Like, I mean, we're all like that in the beginning. Like, you're fumbling around. Does she like this? Does she like me? Am I being too much? And I'm sure the girls are exactly the same. You know, like, am I going to be slutty? Does he really like me? Is this going to last tomorrow? Is he even going to call again? And this is why this is important. Like, this specifically, like, don't tell me this isn't a driving factor from 16 to 60.
Oh,
right?
Fuck, dude. 1000%. And I'm watching my kids Misfits at fucking 9 and 12 and 11 years old get interested in the other sex, right? And like this is where it starts. This is where
this is where I stress it as a life skill, because it's not just the act of. That's great, but at some point you have to take ownership. If a lot of these skills are about ownership and autonomy and self-regulation, then this is most definitely one of them. And I argue then why shouldn't it be? Yeah.
I think too, it's interesting. I think it's interesting because I think in terms of male survival as well, not ever having another guy look at me and say, hey, you have fucking twice as much testosterone as a woman does going through your body, and that's going to make you a little bit of a fucking hornball, and you're going to think some shit that if you're a halfway aware guy, you're going to be like, wow, should I be fucking thinking like this all the time? Yeah, it's your biological nature to want to fuck a log if it looks like it's going to reproduce children. Like, it's just.
And actually, that's what I was leading to as well. Like, and then again, like self-regulation. Like, you're allowed to see someone that you're incredibly attracted to, or you think they're fine, and go, "No, don't say anything."
Yep.
Like, is not your place.
Yep.
Don't touch them. Don't be a douchebag. Don't tell her she's got great tits, because she doesn't want to hear that, dude. That's
Interesting. It just so it makes me with last season with the Misfits, the guides to survival, which I still think we should turn into a book. And then this episode, it's not, again, and I'm in parenthood. I'm actively in parenthood right now, so it's not like I believe that parents are just fucking naive, but like at the same time, my God, like there's so many things that, and again, I don't look at my dad and mom and say, you guys fucked up. You guys did a horrible, terrible job. But there are things that I'm like, holy shit, I wish you guys would have fucking told me, or at least opened me up to the idea that I could learn in that way. Right. Like, again, with with stuff we're talking about sexually, never once, not even a conversation outside of the birds and the bees. Like, you fuck a girl, she has a baby. Like, that's what happens.
We all get the biology.
That's it, though.
All right, so
sucks.
Right, we're running out of time, and I had two examples, but for a counterpoint, for instance, to show that it can be done, I had dinner with a friend over the weekend, and he's Swedish. So very different cultural background, and very different sexual cultural background. He's married. He's got 3 daughters, right? And so it's sort of interesting hearing his take, because normally, like, dads are super protective of their daughters and this whole sort of thing. But when they hit their teenage years and they started dating boys and whatever else, and when the oldest at the time said, "Oh, look, can Joey stay over?" My friend was like, "Yeah, just want to have a chat first." And he openly went to the boyfriend, and said, "Hey, listen, I don't have a problem with you having sex with my daughter, but if you get her pregnant, I'll fucking kill you. So you're going to wear a condom, okay?" And he was like, "Yes, sir." It's like, "Great. You seem like a lovely guy. All the best. You guys have a great night." And then in true parenting style, like, whenever the boyfriend would stay over or whatever, he'd be like, "All right, we're going to walk the dogs. We're walking the dogs now. We'll be back in 45 minutes. And then go walk the dog for 45 minutes and then come back. Like, Brody's taking deep breaths. He's hyperventilating, folks. But right now, this is the point I'm sort of trying to articulate here, is that we might be used to a certain sense of social norms around sex, around what's permitted, around the way that girls should be treated, the way that boys should behave, and all this sort of stuff. Now, here's a father to 3 teenage girls who was just open it. Look, like, sex happens. What, they're going to get drunk and they're going to do it in the back of a car. They're going to hide out late at night. They're going to lie. They're going to, like, I'd rather do it than they do it in my house. They're safe. I'm fine about it. I don't control them. Like, a very liberal, mature, Swedish view of doing things. Now, even in Australia, that shit is wild, bro. But you cannot dismiss the fact that it's probably one of the most open, honest, mature approaches, and parental approaches to something like this.
Yeah, I started seeing red.
Now, here's the disclaimer. I'm telling you this story to demonstrate it can be done in different ways, that other people have different social values, that, girls aren't these sacred virgins on shelves that no one should ever touch. You know, they make mistakes. They like sex too. You know, they should learn to cook. They should learn to self-regulate. They should learn to do all of these things that everyone should do, right? You can do it differently. And here's a living example of a family and a parent that is approaching it differently.
Well, I'd argue too that you know, his relationships with his daughters are probably a little healthier than someone that tries to regulate that in a more defensive way. Because I mean, seriously, Chris called me out on it. I was getting huffy and puffy. Like it's not normal. I'm sorry. Like again, it's not the normal like circumstance to hear that from, and especially not when you preface it with he's a father of three. You know, like daughters, not three kids, like they're all fucking females.
And this was the story he was telling me about his youngest, which means he's done it with his previous two, right? So the oldest is married and got kids, and I think the middle child's moved out as well. So this is the youngest who's still kind of at home at the moment.
But look, I will say this: the more that like after the initial simmer started to go away, like I can't argue with it. I cannot, as a parent, as a grown fucking man, as a halfway self-aware individual, argue with it. Because again, when I was a kid, sex does happen, and it will happen in a fucking weird ass fucking back road in a fucking field in the back of a car. So it's like, again, like what would you prefer? Her be close and safe, and you have some sort of connection to it in terms of still being a father, right? Like that's genuine to me. Like the more that I sat and thought about it,
that you won't be
my daughter would try, if I sat with the way that I was sitting with it, my daughter would try to hide it from me. And like that ultimately, just in the full circle of things, that hurts. Like that I wouldn't want that. So yeah, take some fucking balls, I'll tell you that. But
and look, and very different approach and different cultural upbringing. And I did ask him, because his wife's Australian. I'm like, well, how did she deal with it? He's like, yeah, she wasn't so keen in the beginning, but sort of probably had a similar reaction to you. But anyway, So here we are, Misfits. We've detoured wildly to focus on sex, but that's what Misfits do. Because it's not talked about. You know, we can talk about critical reasoning. You can Google decision making. You can Google how to cook. You know what I mean?
Well, I love the way that we brought it up too, because it wasn't just that it was something that's not talked about, right? Like in terms of the shame or the you know, whatever reason, it's also that because of that, and inherently we're just not talking about it. We're just not, you know. So like for me, I had my 3 rules. Wasn't even a thought. It's not that I'm avoiding it or I wouldn't sit and have this conversation with you. It's just that literally my brain hadn't fucking gone there, and it definitely should have. You know, like that's
why we're here, Misfits. Like, well, is it a life skill? Up to you guys. Is there something that we've missed? You know, is critical reasoning, which is fucking on Google's list, you know, is that imperative in life? You know, right.
Technological fluency was one that I saw on
I was waiting
lists.
for someone to say coding.
Like,
coding is the future.
Like, are you fucking serious? Okay, all right.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any final thoughts on life skills before we wrap up?
No, that was I'm happy with how that turned out. I think that there is some practical. It is. I think there are some practical things that you can take from it, and it's interesting to look at it in that dynamic and not such the let's just run our jaw for a half an hour. You know, there's things that these apply
notes,
to.
Man, I do research. You
do a great job. You do a great job. I just show up.
You had your list of 3. All right, Misfits, that brings us to life skills. What are some critical life skills? You tell us. What did we miss? Broedy, do you know what's coming up for episode 2? Starting us
Yeah.
strong. He's pulling up the
Pursuing
list.
passions.
He's looking at the spreadsheet.
Look at the spreadsheet.
It gives him half a minute.
Careers, pursuing your passion.
Yeah. It's those are the notes. Good man. All right, Misfits. So episode 2 is passion enough? You know, it's the fabled line. If you pursue a job that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Are we calling bullshit? Is there some truth into that? You know, how many of us have given up passion projects or passionate careers in order to pay rent? You know, Broedy, did you ever give up the dream gig or like the passion project because you got mouths to feed, bro?
Yeah, I'm the worst one to ask because like even when I've like had to like give it up, like I'm still quietly working on it, and waiting
get into
for
that.
the bounce back. So I'm persistent on pursuing your passions.
We'll get into it. We're going to deep dive all of that in the next episode. So listen up, Misfits. If you're following us in camp, you're getting this 2 weeks in advance. So good for you. Lucky you. And all the bonus episodes and discounts on merch, which is pretty cool. If you're listening at home, can you like us? Can you tell the algorithm bots on YouTube and Spotify and stuff that we're cool? So if you like us, subscribe and comment. We'll get back to you. And thanks for supporting us. You guys are the best. In the meantime, I've been Chris.
I've been Broedy.
And you stay classy, Misfits. Season 4. We'll see you on the next one.